You're listening to an In-TOUCH podcast from the UCL Knowledge Lab. I'm Lili Golmohammadi, and in this episode we'll be exploring relearning and reconfiguring touch in life-changing circumstances.
It's different, it's all different, but it is a new life. So yes, there are certain things I've lost, like the sense of touch. Well, I don't know if I've lost it. It's just different.
This is Caroline Costa, a former teacher from Bedfordshire. In March last year, she started developing symptoms of COVID, and after a couple of weeks was taken to hospital. By this point, she was in full septic shock and had to be placed in an induced coma.
And when I came out of the coma, my hands and feet had turned black, as had my tongue. And my hands and feet had to be amputated, and the tip of my tongue dropped off as well. So I'm now a quadruple amputee. I've learnt to walk. I had amazing treatment at Bedford Hospital, fantastic rehab down at Roehampton, and I'm bringing myself back up to a second life. It's not the same as my first life. My first life was great. My second life is also great. It's just very different.
Hi, Caroline. Good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
That's Kerstin Mackley, who's also part of the In-TOUCH project. She found Caroline through her Facebook page, A Journey of Recovery. Since coming out of hospital, Caroline's been using this to post to friends and family about her rehabilitation progress. We met up with Caroline online to talk to her about her past and current experiences of touch. To start with, we were curious to know whether touch was something Caroline had thought much about before last year.
Yeah, I don't know that I consciously thought about it as an entity, but it was very important to me. So I've sewn for years and years and years, and the different touches of fabric are very significant to me. And things like stroking my dog was very important, and the touch of that was very important. So yes, I suppose it wasn't something I'd thought about, but it was always something I used quite a bit. One of my calming mechanisms was always touching different surfaces.
And how would you say your experiences of touch have changed?
I remember being very upset at various points, actually, but particularly later in my rehab, about the fact that I'd already had my dog come to visit me by then, but the sense of touch from my stumps is completely different to the sense of touch in your fingers. You have many more nerve endings, of course, in your fingers. And I think there's a bit of, you train them, you develop new neural pathways throughout your life. I was devastated at the thought that I wouldn't be able to feel Duke's fur in the same sense as I've been used to. And that's true. But actually, I think those neural pathways are developing now, because I'm now feeling more of his fur through my stumps than I did at first. I'm more aware of the sensation, and stroking and fussing him has become more of a pleasure. But what was interesting was when I first went into rehab, they did some touch tests on my stumps, my legs particularly, and the physiotherapist actually touched different parts of my stumps with a pencil, and some parts of my stumps I thought were different parts, because when they made my stump, they basically, I hope this isn't too gory, but they basically cut the stump off, but they kept a flap of skin at the front and they folded that underneath. So it's like a square at the bottom. It's sewn like a square. So, of course, the bit at the bottom is actually what was the front of my shin.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Ah.
So when that's touched, and I was asked to describe what it was, I said that's the front of my shin. And it wasn't. It was the bottom of the stump. So it doesn't feel quite, if someone touches me there and I'm not looking, it can feel like a different part of my body.
As well as navigating these sensations that tell her she's being touched in another part of the body, Caroline can also still feel her hands and feet, a phenomenon known as phantom limb.
I could actually hold my hands together with my eyes closed and say, right, that's where they're about touching. And I do get pains and sensations in my hands. So I think possibly because combination of the surgeon was very clever and packed extra muscle into my stump, so I'd have plenty of muscle to control myoelectrics if I wanted to. And the fact that my hands were contracted before they were amputated because they died. They looked exactly like a mummy's hands. They were black and shriveled. And so my hands feel contracted all the time.
Gosh.
And one of the exercises I did in rehab was learning to visualize my fingers opening and closing. And, you know, as I do that, my stumps move because the muscles are still there. But I can actually feel where my hands are all the time. So I know where they are, and I know where my feet are as well. Now with my feet, because I don't know why, but for some reason I've got more sensation as if my feet are touching the floor. You know, as I'm pressing down, I think because as I press down into the floor, my stumps are pressing down into the sockets. So my feet feel like more of a continuation of my legs, if you see what I mean, my prosthetic feet. And I'm developing much more of a sense of where the ground is. But with my feet, I've got more of a sense of touch in a bizarre way than I have with my hands.
Although Carolyn often has this feeling of her feet touching the floor, she still doesn't get the tactile feedback of them flexing in her shoes, which would allow her to more easily readjust her balance.
I have to use my eyes much more when I'm walking, so I can't just look straight ahead. I try to because I don't like walking looking down, but I'm always noticing what the ground surface is like. My balance is coming from shifting my body all the time to keep it over my feet. I try to explain it as it's like you're standing on stilts, but they've got a wide base and your foot is inside a bucket. When my legs fit, then the bucket actually fits closely. But when they don't, it's like standing in a bucket that's moving slightly. So my balance is really important. And I had to really work hard at developing my sense of balance. Yeah. So I did lots of practicing before I got my legs walking on my knees. So when I go to have a shower, I can now shower independently.
So Carolyn's been working at retraining her body in all sorts of ways. Earlier, she mentioned the exercises she had to do to build up the muscles in her stumps, visualising bending her wrists and opening and closing her hands. Doing this would allow her to direct her bionic hero arm. Carolyn talked us through the details.
So it's 3D printed, the one I've got, and it goes on over my stump and hooks over my elbow slightly.
Uh-huh.
And then it's got fingers on the end. So if you look up hero arm, you'll see what it looks like. You'll even see a video of me if you look at their videos. Of my receiving my hero arm. And I control it. It's got sensors inside, which are mapped to muscles in my arms. And when I move those muscles as if I was bending and releasing my wrist, then that powers my hands to open or close. And there are different grip patterns I can use. So in one grip, all the fingers close. And I can also change the thumb position to being outward or inward. And I can bend the thumb manually. It's got one joint that I can push in and out. And then in the second grip, you can have two fingers that will move in and out, but you can also close the other two fingers. So you can do like a victory sign, if you like.
Okay.
It's a tripod grip. And the third one is a single finger grip. And that's the one I'll sometimes use for typing. So it's a single finger and a thumb. But again, you can open or close the other three fingers. Right. So that's like a pincer movement. And it's a great tool. It's a great tool for fussing my dog, for picking things up from the floor, because bending down and tensing your arm muscles to use a hook is not very easy. It's much easier to do with the myoelectric sensors.
Can you talk us a little bit through the first time you put on the bionic arm and how you were able to use it, what you had to learn?
When I first put it on in the clinic, it was just seeing it was like a wow moment. And I particularly remember, obviously I tried the test hand, which isn't attached to you. It's like on the table. So I'd done opening and closing, so I knew how that would look, but I'd never had it with all the hand encircling mine. And the first time I was able to pick up a tennis ball and drop it was just wow. There's a video of me doing it. My husband took it, and I give a little squee of excitement at the end, because it was just such a moment, because up till then, picking anything up is quite an operation. I can, and there are certain things I will probably always do with my stumps rather than with a tool, because things like making a cup of tea, I do with my stumps and my elbow, because that's the easiest way for me to do it. And it's more reliable to hold an insulated mug between my hands than it is to rely on holding it between hooks or between a myoelectric, which might just open or let it slip. That's much easier. But being able to pick something up in one hand and drop it was just an amazing moment. And it's a better version of going back to childhood. You know how in childhood you learn all these different things and you don't really appreciate it. I suppose it's a bit like when your baby takes the first steps and you're so excited for that. Well, I'm getting that excitement, but for me, one of the things I'm really looking forward to trying to do is learning to throw a ball for Duke again and to practice his retrieval, because he's not very good at that. He's very good at catching the ball, but he likes you to chase him for it.
When we'd approached Carolyn about interviewing her, one of the main things we'd been curious about was the bionic arm, because of course the IN-TOUCH project studies technologies that digitally deliver touch. But, as is often the case with digital technologies, the bionic arm is just one of many things that Carolyn draws on, and each one supports her with a different kind of task.
So I should explain properly that I have body-powered prosthetic arms, they're called, and they're very similar to the ones that were developed for the soldiers who came back from First World War. So they're basically the same style. So they're covers on my arms and they have hooks on the end, and I can open and close the hooks by pulling on my shoulder harness. So when I pull, it opens, and when I release, the hooks close. I also have what you might call it is a prosthetic, but it's more like a glove that fits over, that just has, I can fasten a stylus in, or I can use it to grip a mug, but it's not powered. So I have to use my other stump to do it. So it's called a mitt, a koala mitt. So they are all tools. People tend to think they see something like a hero arm and think, oh, she's got hands again. They're not. If you think about all the things your hands can do, quite apart from sensing and all the different movements you can make, we haven't yet got the technology to replicate that. So one of the big problems I have is eating, because I haven't got a wrist that flexes. So if you imagine trying to get food onto a fork and bring it up and put it in your mouth without bending your wrist or using your fingers to tilt anything, you'll see how much of a problem that is, because you can't actually, they haven't yet got something that will bend the wrist for you without you pressing a button, basically. I think some of the new electric hands, that's what they're looking at. So I use the different tools, and that's how I look at them, for different purposes. So my hooks are brilliant for sewing, because my electric hand, the finger and thumb, don't have enough grip to hold a needle firmly enough. So myoelectric is much easier. And of course, when I'm sewing, I have to put the needle in and then let go of it and pull it with the other hook, or pull it from the other side, or push it in and that action of closing and opening is actually quite hard work to keep doing. It's much easier with the hooks. But if I wanted to pick up a tomato, I wouldn't use my hooks because it would squash it. But my myoelectric hand is much better for that, because I can control how much it closes much more easily. My dog is a bit nervous of my hooks. I expect you would be if you saw a piece of metal coming towards your eyes, but loves being fussed with my hero arm.
I thought it was really interesting that you talked about them the different devices you've got as tools, because we wondered how much you would use that term tool, or whether there's any sense that any of these become part of your body, and you know that there's like an extension of your body.
No, for me, I only really came to terms with them by seeing them as tools. Once I could use them to do things that I wanted to do, then they become useful. So all of these tools are just that. They're only as good for me as the amount of use that I can get out of them in things I want to do. It's quite interesting because, you know, things like putting on a mask. I'm actually exempt from wearing a mask because I cannot physically put one on by myself. Now, there are people with prosthetics who've learned to do it, but it's quite a complicated process because, of course, when you put a mask on, you feel your fingers by your ear and you know, therefore, where your ear is. If I'm using hooks, I can't do that. You know, I actually would need to stand and bend and hook the strap of the mask over my ear and then bend the other way so that gravity pulled it down. And it's too complicated. So I just rely on someone else putting a mask on. You know, I know there are people with prosthetic arms who've learned to do that, but it's a really difficult thing to do.
It really involves the rest of your body as well, much more, doesn't it, than if you just had to...
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's lots of things like that you don't realize how much you rely on the feedback from your hands in order to be able to do it. So it's not just losing the fingers. You know, that's why a prosthetic hand can't take the place of it, because you've lost that sense of feedback. I know they are working on hands that give feedback. You know, that is something the prosthetics world is looking at.
As Carolyn says, these technologies are improving, and hopefully it won't be too long before they can regularly integrate things like tactile feedback and wrist flexibility. Speaking to Carolyn made us realise how much she has to plan everything in advance as she works with these different tools. To decide which tool to use, she has to be especially clear beforehand about what kind of grasp she'll need. Carolyn also has to be a creative toolmaker herself when facing our everyday design world.
And actually, the world is... Our society is better at accommodating people in wheelchairs than it is people with no hands.
In which way, do you think?
Well, think of trying to use a cash point, or even using card payments if it's not contactless. How would you do that with no hands?
What would you use at the moment? Would you use
I'd use my elbow, or I have a cuff that is easy to put into my bag, and I can stick a pen in it. So I usually have the cuff in my bag at all times. And then if I need to, I'll just borrow a pen, put it the wrong way up and use that to poke numbers. It's actually a footballer's armband.
Oh, really?
The captain's armband, because it has a C on, Carolyn. And I got someone to shorten it and put it's got Velcro on. So I can actually fasten that on myself with my teeth, and then I can stick a pen through it.
Our everyday touch experiences can be hard to pin down and articulate. Sometimes we become more aware of them only through more extreme circumstances. On some level, we've all become a bit more attuned to touch recently because the pandemic restrictions have reduced who and what we can touch. But over the past 16 months, the way Carolyn experiences the world, especially through touch, has significantly changed. She now doesn't get the same tactile feedback that her hands and feet gave her before the amputations. Yet speaking to Carolyn shows how it's possible to regain and reconfigure certain aspects of sensory experience. For example, over time she's been able to feel and enjoy more through her stumps, and through training the muscles in those stumps, she's also able to direct the hand movement of her bionic arm. And yet at the same time, there are nerve endings in her stumps that belong to slightly different parts of her body, and she can also still sense where her hands and feet are, the experience known as phantom limb. These together create a wholly different set of tactile experiences and show just how complex and malleable touch is. Carolyn's told us she's very happy to talk to other amputees. You can reach out to and follow her on her Facebook page, A Journey of Recovery, which we've included in the show notes. Thanks for downloading and listening to this In-Touch podcast from the UCL Knowledge Lab.